They pushed the black girl into the pool, unaware she was the billionaire CEO's fiancée. The GPS in Ava Sinclair's Tesla announced her arrival at Sterling Pines Country Club with the same mechanical precision she used to close million-dollar deals. But as she pulled through the iron gates adorned with gold-plated family crests dating back to the 1920s, something felt different. This wasn't a boardroom where her Harvard MBA and razor-sharp intellect commanded respect. This was old money territory, where bloodlines mattered more than bank accounts. Ava adjusted her rearview mirror and caught her reflection: smooth mahogany skin, natural hair swept into an elegant updo, wearing a stunning emerald dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary. She looked perfect, and she knew it. But perfection, she'd learned, meant different things to different people. The valet, a young white man in his 20s, approached her car with visible confusion. His eyes darted from her luxury vehicle to her face, then back again, as if trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense to him. "Ma'am, are you here for the, catering staff entrance?" he stammered, his cheeks flushing red. Ava's smile never wavered, though something cold flickered in her dark eyes. "No, I'm here for the Roth Foundation charity luncheon. I'm a guest." The valet's confusion deepened. He glanced at his clipboard, scanning for her name among what was clearly a very exclusive list. "And you are?" "Ava Sinclair." Recognition didn't dawn on his face. Instead, he fumbled with his phone, probably texting someone inside. After an uncomfortable 30 seconds, he handed her a parking ticket with the forced smile of someone following orders. "Welcome to Sterling Pines, Miss Sinclair." As Ava walked toward the club's grand entrance, she noticed how conversations paused and resumed in whispers. The marble steps beneath her heels seemed to echo louder than they should, announcing her presence like a warning bell. She'd been to dozens of high society events, but never one where she felt so deliberately out of place. The Sterling Pines Country Club was a monument to exclusivity. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across cream-colored walls lined with portraits of long-dead patriarchs. The air smelled of old leather, expensive perfume, and something else, the particular scent of inherited privilege that couldn't be bought, only passed down. "Excuse me, miss?" Ava turned to find an elderly woman with pearl earrings and a pinched expression approaching her. The woman's eyes performed a quick scan from head to toe, cataloging every detail of Ava's appearance with the efficiency of a court stenographer. "I'm Margaret Whitfield, the event coordinator," the woman said, her voice carrying the false sweetness of artificial vanilla. "I don't believe we've met. Are you here with the Foundation's community outreach program?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigar, seemingly innocent but impossible to ignore. Ava recognized the code. Community outreach program was simply polite society's way of asking if she was the token black guest, brought in to make the wealthy white donors feel better about their charitable tax write-offs. "Actually, I'm Adrian Roth's fiancée," Ava replied, watching Margaret's expression shift through surprise, skepticism, and finally, calculated politeness. "Oh!" Margaret's hand flew to her chest as if she'd been struck. "Oh my goodness, I had no idea Adrian was, that is to say, we weren't expecting." She trailed off, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. "Expecting what, exactly?" Ava's voice remained perfectly pleasant, but there was steel underneath the silk. "Well, Adrian never mentioned he was bringing anyone today. And certainly not." Margaret caught herself before finishing the sentence, but the damage was done. The unspoken words, "someone like you," hung between them like a neon sign. "He's running late from a business meeting," Ava explained, though she owed this woman nothing. "He asked me to represent him until he arrives." Margaret's recovery was impressive, Ava had to admit. Years of navigating social landmines had given the woman reflexes that would make a diplomat proud. Of course. How wonderful. You must be so proud of Adrian's success." The pause before proud was microscopic but telling. It suggested that Ava was somehow lucky to be associated with Adrian, rather than an equal partner. As Margaret led her into the main dining room, Ava felt dozens of pairs of eyes tracking her movement. Conversations didn't stop entirely, but they shifted, becoming more animated in some corners and more hushed in others. She recognized the pattern, the same one that happened in boardrooms when she walked in, the same one that occurred at industry conferences when she took the stage. The dining room was a masterpiece of understated luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of manicured gardens that probably cost more to maintain than most people's houses. Round tables draped in cream linen were set with china that belonged in museums. Fresh orchids and white roses created centerpieces that whispered rather than shouted their elegance. But it was the seating arrangement that told the real story. "Oh dear," Margaret said, consulting her tablet with exaggerated concern. "It seems there's been a small mix-up with the seating chart. Adrian's family table is completely full, but we have a lovely spot for you right over here." She gestured toward a table near the kitchen doors, populated by what Ava immediately recognized as the B-list guests, younger wives who hadn't yet earned their place in the inner circle, plus a few carefully selected diversity additions. The charity case table, in other words. Ava surveyed the room with the strategic mind that had built her own company from nothing. Adrian's family occupied the prime table near the podium, their backs straight with the confidence of people who never questioned their right to be anywhere. Surrounding them in concentric circles were the various tiers of Sterling Pines society, arranged by some invisible hierarchy that everyone understood but no one discussed. "How thoughtful," Ava said, her tone giving away nothing. "I'm sure it will be perfect." As she made her way to her assigned seat, Ava caught fragments of conversation that confirmed her suspicions. This wasn't just a charity luncheon, it was an evaluation. Adrian had been secretive about their relationship for months, citing business complications and timing. Now she understood why. These people had been waiting to get their first look at the woman who'd captured their golden boy's attention. "Is that her?" The whisper came from a blonde woman dripping in diamonds, speaking to her companion behind a champagne flute. "Must be. I heard she's some kind of consultant or something." "Consultant?" The blonde's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Honey, we all know what that means." Ava's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but her smile remained fixed. She'd heard variations of this conversation her entire career. Successful black woman equals affirmative action hire, diversity consultant, or worse. Never mind her MIT engineering degree, her Harvard MBA, or the tech company she'd built and sold before she was 30. At her assigned table, she was greeted by carefully orchestrated friendliness. The other women introduced themselves with the practiced ease of professional socialites, their questions probing but polite. "So Ava, what is it that you do? How did you and Adrian meet? Have you been to Sterling Pines before?" Each question carried subtext, and each answer was mentally filed away for later dissection. Ava played along, providing just enough information to satisfy curiosity without revealing anything substantial. She'd learned long ago that in rooms like this, knowledge was power, and power was never given freely. But as the first course was served, a delicate salmon tartare that probably cost more than most people's grocery budget, Ava realized something that made her stomach tighten with anticipation rather than anxiety. These people had made a critical error in their calculations. They thought they were evaluating her. They had no idea she was evaluating them right back. And unlike them, she actually had the power to do something about what she found. The transition from the dining room to the manicured gardens felt like crossing into enemy territory. As guests moved outside for the auction portion of the event, Ava found herself gravitating toward the infinity pool that sparkled like liquid diamonds under the afternoon sun. The poolside brunch tables were arranged with military precision, each one offering perfect views of both the auction stage and the sprawling grounds that stretched toward the distant hills. Delilah Vance materialized beside her as if summoned by some invisible social radar. Ava had spotted her earlier, a woman in her 40s with platinum blonde hair styled to perfection and the kind of bone structure that whispered of good breeding and better plastic surgery. Her cream-colored Chanel suit probably cost more than most cars, and she wore it with the casual confidence of someone who never had to check a price tag. "You must be Ava," Delilah said, extending a manicured hand that felt cold despite the warm afternoon. "I'm Delilah Vance." My husband sits on the Roth Industries board. The introduction was calculated, establishing her connection to Adrian's business empire while simultaneously positioning herself as the gatekeeper to this exclusive world. Ava recognized the power play immediately. How lovely to meet you, Ava replied, matching Delilah's smile what for what. Adrian speaks so highly of the board members. Does he? Delilah's eyes sharpened with interest. And what exactly does he tell you about the business? The question was a trap disguised as small talk. Answer too knowledgeably, and she'd be seen as overstepping her bounds as a mere fiancée. Answer too vaguely, and she'd be dismissed as arm candy. Oh, you know how men are, Ava said with a laugh that sounded perfectly natural. Always protecting us from the boring details. Delilah's smile widened, satisfied that she'd correctly categorized this potential threat. Exactly. My Harold is the same way. He thinks I wouldn't understand all that complicated technology nonsense. As they were joined by two other women, Victoria Ashford and Penelope Cross, both wives of prominent businessmen, Ava found herself surrounded by a carefully orchestrated interrogation disguised as friendly conversation. Your dress is so bold, Victoria commented, her tone suggesting that boldness was not necessarily a virtue. Where did you find it? Milan, Ava replied simply, not mentioning that it was custom-made by a designer whose waiting list stretched for years. Oh, how exotic, Penelope chimed in. You must travel quite a bit for your work. The pause before work was loaded with assumption. These women had clearly decided she was some sort of consultant or assistant who'd managed to catch their golden boy's attention. What is it that you do exactly? Delilah asked, her voice carrying the false sweetness of someone preparing to deliver a social death blow. Adrian mentioned you work with foundations? Here it was, the moment they'd been building toward. Ava could see the anticipation in their eyes, the way they leaned in slightly, ready to categorize and dismiss her based on her answer. I do some consulting work, Ava said, deliberately vague. Let them think what they wanted to think. How wonderful! Victoria's enthusiasm was as genuine as a $3 bill. It must be so fulfilling to help those less fortunate. The conversation continued in this vein as they moved toward the auction tables. Each comment was a small cut, designed to make Ava feel out of place without being overtly hostile. They asked about her family. How nice that you're so close to your roots. Her education. Community involvement is so important. And her relationship with Adrian. It must be exciting to experience this world for the first time. But it was when they reached the silent auction that the real games began. The auction items were displayed on tables draped in white silk, each one more luxurious than the last. Diamond jewelry, artwork by famous artists, vacation packages to exclusive resorts, and there, catching Ava's eye immediately, a luxury yacht cruise through the Mediterranean, complete with private chef and crew. Oh, that's gorgeous! Delilah sighed, stopping at the yacht cruise display. Harold and I went on something similar last year. Absolutely divine. She signed the bid sheet with a flourish, writing down a figure that made the other women gasp appreciatively. $5,000, a substantial bid that clearly marked this as her territory. That's quite generous, Ava commented, studying the auction description. Well, some of us believe in supporting worthy causes, Delilah replied, the implication clear. Some of us, unlike others who couldn't possibly afford such generosity. As the afternoon wore on, the dynamics became clearer. Delilah was the alpha of this particular pack, with Victoria and Penelope serving as her lieutenants. Together, they controlled much of the social flow of the event, determining who was worth talking to and who could be safely ignored. Ava watched and listened, cataloging every slight, every assumption, every moment of casual cruelty disguised as concern. When they asked if she needed help understanding the auction process, she smiled and thanked them. When they wondered aloud if the Mediterranean cruise might be too sophisticated for someone new to this lifestyle, she nodded thoughtfully. But when the final bidding was announced and guests were called to submit their last offers, Ava made her move. She walked to the yacht cruise table, picked up the pen, and wrote a number that made everyone within reading distance stop breathing. $25,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Delilah's face went through several colors, settling on a shade of red that clashed violently with her cream suit. That's quite a bid," Victoria stammered. "For a worthy cause," Ava replied, using Delilah's own words against her. As news of the bid spread through the crowd, Ava felt the shift in attention like a physical force. Suddenly, she wasn't just the mysterious woman Adrian was dating. She was someone with serious money, the kind of money that commanded respect in this world, regardless of its source. But she could also feel the target painting itself on her back. In a world where hierarchy was everything, she just upset the established order. And some people, Ava was about to learn, didn't handle disruption very well. The dessert service had begun, and with it came the liquid courage that often turned polite society gatherings into battlegrounds. Champagne flutes clinked with increasing frequency as the afternoon sun cast longer shadows across the infinity pool. Ava stood near the pool's edge, admiring the way the water seemed to blend seamlessly with the horizon, when she heard the click of heels approaching behind her. "Enjoying the view?" Delilah's voice had lost some of its earlier sweetness, replaced by something sharper, more predatory. Ava turned to find herself facing not just Delilah, but Victoria and Penelope as well, forming a small semicircle that effectively blocked her path back to the main gathering. Their positioning was deliberate, predatory, like wolves who had finally cornered their prey away from the safety of the pack. "It's beautiful," Ava replied, keeping her voice level despite the warning bells going off in her head. "Sterling Pines really is spectacular." "Yes, it is," Delilah agreed, stepping closer. The champagne on her breath was noticeable now, loosening the careful restraints of good breeding. "It's been in some of our families for generations. A real legacy, you understand." The emphasis on our families was unmistakable. This was territory marking at its most primitive level. "How wonderful to have such deep roots," Ava said diplomatically, though she was calculating distances. To the main crowd, to the exits, to anywhere that might offer witnesses to whatever was about to unfold. "Roots matter," Victoria chimed in, emboldened by Delilah's lead. "They determine so much about a person's character. Their place in the world." Penelope nodded sagely, as if this was profound wisdom rather than barely disguised racism. "Some people understand the importance of tradition, of knowing one's place. Others—" She let the sentence hang, heavy with implication. Ava felt something cold settle in her chest, not fear, but recognition. She'd been here before, in different forms, in boardrooms and conference halls and country clubs just like this one. The faces changed, but the message remained the same: you don't belong here. "Speaking of knowing one's place," Delilah continued, circling closer like a shark scenting blood, "I have to ask, what exactly are your intentions with Adrian?" The question was delivered with the casualness of someone asking about the weather, but Ava heard the steel underneath. This wasn't idle curiosity, this was an interrogation. "I'm not sure I understand," Ava replied, though she understood perfectly. "Well, it's just that Adrian is so important to so many people," Victoria explained, her voice dripping false concern. "His family, his business associates, his social circle. We all care about his happiness, of course, but also his reputation." "Reputation?" Ava repeated, letting a note of steel creep into her own voice. "Don't misunderstand us," Penelope rushed to add, though her smile was razor-sharp. "We're sure you're a lovely person. It's just that marrying into certain circles requires, well, it requires understanding the expectations." Delilah moved even closer, close enough that Ava could smell her expensive perfume mixed with champagne and something else, the acrid scent of jealousy and spite. "The thing is, dear," Delilah said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than a shout. "Some women are born for this world, and others, well, others think they can buy their way in." The insult hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Around them, the party continued, laughter and conversation creating a bubble of normalcy that felt surreal given the tension crackling between the four women. "That's an interesting perspective," Ava said quietly, her composure never wavering even as fury built in her chest like a gathering storm. "Oh, come now," Victoria laughed, the sound like breaking crystal. "We're all friends here. We just want to make sure you understand the complexities of Adrian's position." "The complexities," Ava repeated flatly. "His family has expectations," Penelope added helpfully. "Certain standards. You understand." They were closing ranks now, their circle tightening around her. Ava realized with crystalline clarity that this had been planned. The location by the pool, the timing during dessert when most guests were distracted, even the liquid courage that had loosened their tongues enough to say what they really thought. "Here's what I understand," Ava said, her voice cutting through their false concern like a blade through silk. "I understand that you're threatened by something you can't control or categorize." The words hit their target. Delilah's face flushed red, her carefully maintained mask slipping to reveal the ugly truth underneath. "How dare you?" she began, stepping forward aggressively. "Ladies! There you are!" The interruption came from behind them, Margaret Wickfield approaching with a forced smile and nervous energy. "I've been looking everywhere for you. The photographer wants some shots by the pool for the Foundation newsletter." But as Margaret raised her camera and the women automatically arranged themselves for the photo, Delilah made her move. What happened next unfolded in slow motion, like a car accident Ava could see coming but couldn't prevent. "Oh, this will be perfect!" Victoria exclaimed, stepping closer to Ava as if to include her in the group shot. The nudge was subtle at first, Victoria bumping into Ava as if by accident, pushing her slightly off balance toward the pool's edge. Ava steadied herself, but then felt another, more deliberate push from behind. "Oops!" Penelope giggled, though her eyes were cold as winter. And then Delilah, with a smile that would have fooled the cameras, gave Ava the final shove that sent her tumbling backward into the infinity pool. The water was shockingly cold, closing over her head as her emerald dress billowed around her like seaweed. For a moment, she was completely submerged in silence, the sounds of the party muffled and distant. Then she surfaced, gasping, her carefully styled hair now plastered to her head, makeup running down her cheeks in dark streams. Above her, the three women stood at the pool's edge, their expressions a mixture of feigned surprise and barely concealed satisfaction. "Oh my goodness!" Delilah exclaimed, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "What happened? Did you slip?" Laughter rippled through the onlookers, some shocked, some delighted by the unexpected entertainment. Margaret fumbled with her camera, torn between helping and documenting the moment. Ava treaded water for a moment, looking up at the circle of faces staring down at her. Some showed genuine concern, others poorly hidden amusement, and a few displayed the kind of cruel satisfaction that comes from watching someone else's humiliation. But as she pulled herself out of the pool, water streaming from her ruined dress, something fundamental had shifted. The three women who had orchestrated her fall were still smiling, still playing their parts for the audience. They had no idea they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Ava stood dripping on the pool deck, her dark eyes meeting Delilah's triumphant gaze with a calmness that was somehow more terrifying than rage would have been. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush. "That was illuminating." 23 minutes later, Ava sat alone in one of the club's private cabanas, her hair wrapped in a plush sterling pines towel, wearing a borrowed terry cloth robe that smelled of expensive detergent and old money. Her phone buzzed against the wooden table, another text from Adrian apologizing for his delay. The acquisition deal had taken longer than expected, but he was finally en route. She stared at the screen, debating whether to tell him what had happened. The old Ava, the one who had spent years proving herself in rooms full of men who saw her as an intruder, might have stayed silent, swallowed the humiliation, and pretended everything was fine. But that woman had died somewhere between hitting the cold water and climbing out under the amused gazes of Sterling Pine's finest. The sound of expensive engines pulling into the circular drive drifted across the grounds. Ava recognized the deep purr of Adrian's Bentley immediately. She'd ridden in it enough times to know its distinctive sound. Her pulse quickened, not with nervousness but with anticipation. The first act of this little drama was over. Now came the reckoning. Through the cabana's open side, she could see the main dining area where the charity luncheon was winding down. Delilah held court at the center of a cluster of admirers, no doubt regaling them with her version of the pool incident. Her animated gestures and bright laughter suggested she was painting herself as the innocent bystander to an unfortunate accident. "Ava?" Adrian's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade through silk. She looked up to see him striding across the poolside patio, his tall frame cutting an impressive silhouette in his tailored charcoal suit. At 34, Adrian Roth commanded attention wherever he went, not just because of his family's wealth, but because of the empire he'd built himself. His dark hair was slightly mussed from running his hands through it, a telltale sign that the acquisition meeting had been as complex as he'd anticipated. But it was his eyes that gave her pause. Ice blue and sharp as winter morning, they were scanning the area with the focused intensity of a predator who sensed something was wrong. "There you are," he said, relief flooding his features as he spotted her. "I've been looking everywhere. Margaret said you weren't feeling well, but she was being strangely evasive about." He stopped mid-sentence as he took in her appearance. The damp hair, the borrowed robe, the way she was sitting with the careful stillness of someone holding themselves together through sheer will. "What happened?" The question came out low and dangerous, the tone he used in boardrooms when someone had made a very expensive mistake. Ava studied his face, noting the way his jaw tightened as he waited for her answer. This was the moment of truth. She could minimize it, make excuses, preserve the peace. Or she could tell him exactly what kind of people populated his social circle. "I went for a swim," she said simply. Adrian's eyes narrowed. He'd built a tech empire worth billions by reading between the lines, by understanding what people weren't saying as much as what they were. "In your dress?" "Apparently it wasn't my choice." The temperature around them seemed to drop 10 degrees. Adrian moved closer, his eyes never leaving her face. "Tell me exactly what happened." "All of it." So she did. Ava recounted the afternoon in clinical detail, the subtle interrogation, the territorial marking, the deliberate isolation by the pool, and finally, the coordinated assault disguised as an accident. She watched Adrian's expression grow colder with each sentence, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. When she finished, silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Adrian stared out at the pool where the afternoon sun cast dancing reflections on the water's surface, his mind clearly racing through implications and consequences. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "I should never have left you alone with them. I knew there might be resistance to our relationship, but I thought they'd at least maintain the pretense of civility." "Resistance?" Ava raised an eyebrow. "Is that what we're calling it?" Adrian turned back to her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It wasn't just anger, it was recognition. The dawning understanding that the woman he loved had been deliberately humiliated while he was making deals and shaking hands. "They have no idea who they just messed with, do they?" he asked, and there was something almost predatory in his smile. "None whatsoever," Ava confirmed. Adrian helped her to her feet, his hands gentle but his expression granite hard. "Stay here. I need to go have a conversation with our hosts." But Ava caught his arm as he started to turn away. "Adrian, wait. There's something you should know before you go back in there." He paused, eyebrows raised in question. "I outbid Delilah Vance on the yacht cruise auction," she said. $25,000. A slow smile spread across Adrian's face, the kind of smile that had made competitors nervous for over a decade. "Did you now? I thought you should know, in case it comes up in conversation." "Oh, it's going to come up," Adrian said, his voice carrying promises of retribution that made Ava's pulse quicken for entirely different reasons. "Along with a few other things they're about to learn." He kissed her forehead gently, a gesture so tender it made her chest tight. Then he straightened, and she watched his entire demeanor transform. The loving fiancé disappeared, replaced by the billionaire CEO who had built an empire by never backing down from a fight. "I'll be right back," he said. This won't take long. As Adrian walked back toward the main dining area, Ava settled back into her chair to watch the show. Through the open walls of the dining room, she could see him approach the lingering guests with the easy confidence of someone who owned the room simply by entering it. The conversation stopped. Heads turned. And somewhere in that crowd, 3 women who thought they understood power were about to get a very expensive education. Ava smiled, finally allowing herself to feel the anticipation that had been building since she'd climbed out of that pool. Phase 2 was about to begin. The Roth Industries headquarters building pierced the Seattle skyline like a steel and glass monument to innovation. At 9 a.m. sharp, the main conference room on the 40th floor was packed with reporters, cameras, and enough media equipment to broadcast to the world. Ava stood at the mahogany podium, her posture perfect, wearing a crisp navy suit that spoke of serious business rather than social games. Less than 18 hours had passed since the pool incident, but the world had changed completely. The video had gone viral overnight. Someone at Sterling Pines had filmed the entire confrontation on their phone, capturing not just Ava's fall but the moments leading up to it. The audio was crystal clear, every cruel comment, every calculated insult, every second of the coordinated attack disguised as polite conversation. By midnight, #Poolgate was trending on every social platform, with millions of views and growing outrage. But it wasn't just the public humiliation that had captured the world's attention. It was what came after. "Good morning," Ava began, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had built her first company from a garage startup to a $50 million acquisition. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice." The cameras rolled as she placed her hands on the podium, her engagement ring catching the studio lights, a 5-carat diamond that had cost more than most people's houses, now serving as a symbol of the power these women had tried to diminish. Yesterday's events at Sterling Pines Country Club have prompted some necessary conversations about equity, inclusion, and accountability in philanthropic spaces, she continued. But before I address those issues, I think it's important that everyone understands who I am, and why yesterday's actions were not just personally offensive, but professionally devastating to the very causes these individuals claim to support. A murmur ran through the assembled reporters. They'd been expecting a standard victim statement, maybe a call for apologies. This felt different, bigger. "My name is Ava Sinclair," she said, pausing to let the name sink in. "I am the founder and former CEO of Sinclair Tech Solutions, which developed the encryption protocols currently used by 70% of Fortune 500 companies. I sold that company 3 years ago for $250 million. The murmur became a buzz. Phone screens lit up as reporters frantically Googled her name, cross-referencing the information with tech industry databases. "I am also," Ava continued, her voice growing stronger, "the co-founder and current president of the Sinclair Roth Foundation, the very organization that yesterday's charity luncheon was supposedly supporting." The buzz became a roar. Cameras flashed as the full scope of the previous day's disaster became clear. The women who had pushed her into the pool hadn't just attacked a guest, they had attacked the person whose foundation they were pretending to support. The Sinclair Roth Foundation has, over the past 2 years, distributed over $50 million in grants to organizations focused on educational equity, technology access in underserved communities, and economic empowerment for women and minorities. Ava explained, her delivery as smooth as a boardroom presentation. "We have partnerships with 17 organizations currently represented by board members and spouses who were present at yesterday's event." She paused, letting the implications sink in. In the audience, she could see reporters making connections, calculating the financial impact of what was about to come. "Following yesterday's incident, and after careful review of our partnership criteria, the Sinclair Roth Foundation will be conducting a comprehensive audit of all current funding relationships," Ava announced. "We will be reallocating significant portions of our annual giving budget to community-led organizations that demonstrate genuine commitment to the values we espouse." Her phone had been buzzing all morning with panicked calls from the very people who had laughed at her humiliation. Delilah Vance's husband's construction company had a $5 million contract with the foundation. Victoria Ashford sat on the board of a literacy nonprofit that received $2 million annually. Penelope Cross's pet project, a women's leadership institute, was funded almost entirely by Sinclair Roth grants. All of that was about to change. Additionally, Ava continued, "We are announcing a new initiative, the Sterling Accountability Project. This program will provide grants specifically to organizations led by individuals who have experienced discrimination in elite philanthropic spaces. Our first round of funding will total $25 million. The exact amount she had bid on the yacht cruise. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Adrian appeared at her side, his presence commanding instant attention. As the CEO of Roth Industries, his word carried weight in boardrooms across the globe. But today, he was simply a man supporting the woman he loved. "The Sterling Accountability Project represents more than funding," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "It represents a fundamental shift in how we approach philanthropy and social responsibility. Actions have consequences, and those consequences extend far beyond hurt feelings." Behind them, a screen lit up with financial projections, organizational charts, and the names of every individual and entity that would be affected by the Foundation's new direction. It was corporate warfare dressed up as social justice, and it was devastatingly effective. Ava fielded questions for 20 minutes, each answer delivered with the precision of someone who had spent years in hostile boardrooms. When asked about the personal impact of the incident, she was gracious but firm. When pressed about the financial implications for the individuals involved, she was matter-of-fact. "Philanthropy is about supporting causes and communities," she said in response to the final question. "When individuals use charitable events as venues for discrimination and cruelty, they disqualify themselves from participation in that mission. It's quite simple, really." As the press conference concluded and reporters rushed out to file their stories, Ava felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete satisfaction. Not just at the justice of it all, but at the elegant efficiency of using the system itself to deliver consequences. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Please, we need to talk. This has gone too far. DV." Ava deleted the message without responding. Some lessons she had learned could only be taught once. By evening, the story had spread across every major news outlet. Sterling Pines Country Club issued a carefully worded statement about investigating the incident. 3 major donors publicly announced they were reviewing their charitable giving strategies. And somewhere in the exclusive neighborhood surrounding the club, 3 women were learning that in the modern world, power didn't always come from bloodlines. Sometimes it came from knowing how to code. 1 week later, Ava walked through the same marble entrance of Sterling Pines Country Club. But everything had changed. The same crystal chandeliers cast their rainbow prisms, the same cream-colored walls displayed their portraits of long-dead patriarchs, but the air itself felt different. Where once there had been the suffocating scent of inherited privilege, now there was something else, the sharp, clean smell of accountability. Tonight she wore a midnight blue gown that flowed like liquid starlight, her natural hair styled in an elegant crown of curls that had taken 2 hours to perfect. Adrian walked beside her in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his hand resting protectively on the small of her back. But protection, Ava had learned, was no longer something she needed from anyone else. The same valet who had questioned her presence a week ago now rushed to open her car door with the eager deference reserved for those whose names appeared on donor plaques and foundation boards. His smile was genuine this time, born of respect rather than instruction. "Welcome back to Sterling Pines, Miss Sinclair," he said, and the title carried weight that her name alone hadn't possessed 7 days earlier. The transformation inside was even more dramatic. Where the previous week's luncheon had been a sea of familiar faces from the same exclusive circles, tonight's diversity and inclusion gala was a celebration of voices that had long been excluded from these halls. Tech entrepreneurs whose innovations were changing the world. Community leaders whose organizations were now recipients of Sinclair Roth Foundation grants. Young people whose potential had been unlocked by educational programs that would never again depend on the whims of social gatekeepers. Margaret Whitfield approached them near the entrance, her demeanor a stark contrast to their previous meeting. Gone was the artificial sweetness and barely concealed condescension. In its place was the genuine nervousness of someone who understood that power dynamics had fundamentally shifted. "Ms. Sinclair, Mr. Roth," she said, her voice carrying none of its previous authority. "Thank you so much for hosting tonight's event here. The club is honored to support such an important initiative." Ava accepted the gratitude with a gracious nod, though she noticed how Margaret's eyes never quite met hers directly. Fear, she had learned, was often the first step toward genuine respect. As they moved through the transformed space, Ava catalogued the changes. Where Delilah's crowd had once held court, she now saw Dr. Keisha Williams, the brilliant educator who had replaced Delilah's husband on 3 different foundation boards. The woman's intelligence sparkled in her eyes as she discussed educational equity with a group of rapt listeners who hung on her every word because of what she had accomplished, not whom she had married. The auction tables told their own story of revolution. Instead of luxury cruises and jewelry, tonight's items focused on experiences and opportunities: coding boot camps for underserved youth, mentorship programs for women entrepreneurs, scholarships to prestigious universities for first-generation college students. The bidding was spirited but purposeful, each dollar directed toward building bridges rather than maintaining walls. And there, near the bar where she had once nursed champagne while plotting Ava's downfall, stood Delilah Vance. The transformation was startling. Gone was the predatory confidence, the casual cruelty disguised as social sophistication. Instead, Delilah looked smaller somehow, diminished by a week of public scrutiny and private consequences. Her husband's construction company had lost not just the foundation contracts but 3 other major clients who didn't want to be associated with the Sterling Pines scandal. Victoria and Penelope flanked her, forming a defensive triangle that spoke of shared exile rather than shared power. When Delilah's eyes met Ava's across the room, there was no challenge in them, no territorial aggression. Instead, there was something that looked almost like recognition, the grudging acknowledgement of a superior opponent. Ava could have approached them, could have savored their discomfort or demanded apologies. Instead, she turned away. Some victories, she had learned, were best celebrated by focusing on the future rather than dwelling on the past. The evening's program began with Adrian introducing the new direction of their foundation's work. His speech was polished and powerful, but it was when he introduced Ava that the room truly came alive. The applause was thunderous, sustained, born of genuine admiration rather than social obligation. When Ava took the podium, the same podium where she had been dismissed and diminished just 7 days earlier, she felt the weight of history shifting beneath her feet. "True class," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the transformed space, "isn't measured by lineage or bank accounts, or how long your family's name has been carved into marble walls." Her eyes swept the audience, taking in faces that reflected the beautiful diversity of human potential finally given room to flourish. "True class is measured by how you treat someone when you think no one important is watching," she continued, and the silence that followed was profound, reverent. "It's measured by whether you use your privilege to build bridges or walls, whether you see difference as a threat to be eliminated or a strength to be celebrated." She raised her champagne flute, the crystal catching the light like captured starlight. "Tonight, we toast not just new partnerships and new programs, but new rules. Rules that say worth is earned, not inherited. Rules that say a seat at the table belongs to anyone brilliant enough to pull it up for themselves." The toast that followed was magnificent, glasses raised by hands of every color, voices joined in celebration of a future that looked nothing like the past. As the evening wound down and guests began to filter out into the night, Ava found herself standing once again by the infinity pool. The water sparkled under the stars, pristine and untouched, reflecting the lights of a party that had celebrated inclusion rather than exclusion. Adrian joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they looked out over the grounds that had once felt like enemy territory. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Ava leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, the security of knowing she was loved not for what she represented but for who she was. "Only one," she said, her voice light with satisfaction. "I should have worn a swimsuit last week." This dress was much too expensive to ruin. Their laughter echoed across the water, bright and free, carrying on the night air like a promise that the future belonged to those brave enough to dive in.